Call of Cthulhu. Is it really a game, or is it just an interactive story? Jesus Christ. Oh yeah, and it has 2 or 3 of those moments in it too. Hi everyone, Mark here again with a no-nonsense review to let you know if Call of Cthulhu is worth playing. There'll be no spoilers in this video, but if you would like to see my entire playthrough of it, then just click the link below. Like most Call of Cthulhu adventures, you play an investigator who somehow gets caught up in some innocent-sounding investigation which later turns into an existential horror story, this time involving the occult, human medical experimentation, sea monsters, tentacles, and the potential end of the world. Or is it? Is it all in your head? Is it really even happening? Like any Lovecraft story, and like any of the Call of Cthulhu games for those of you who are familiar with them, this is pretty much standard fare. Set in the 1920s, you play a down-on-their-luck private eye when one day, some mysterious old giffer turns up at your office with a creepy painting. They ask you to go and investigate a missing family member. You know something isn't quite right about this, but hey, you need the money. And that's where the game begins. Off you go on your investigations, which quickly take you to a small island populated by inbred religious fanatics. Your job is to use your tried and trusted detective skills of interrogation, investigation, and good all-round sleuthing to try and piece together what happened to said family member, what's going on this island, and, potentially you might even get to save the world. Or will you? Because perhaps all this is just going on in your head. Perhaps it's a dream, perhaps you've gone insane. You'll never know. Perhaps, depending on what ending you get. I know that sounds kind of weird, and I can't say too much without giving away half the plot and the story, but actually the game does this very well, and it does feel very Cthulhu-esque. You're never quite sure, especially later on, what's reality and what isn't. So the game progresses chapter by chapter, each one drawing you further into this story of the occult and madness. Each chapter is essentially a location in the game, some of them quite large, giving you a chance to explore, look for clues, and really, you have to search hard. You have to look at everything you possibly can, and you can also talk to any of the NPCs in each location. Some of them you need to interact with, persuade, or just glean information from. This is kind of where the interrogation bit comes in. But pay close attention to every character you meet and everything they say, because I can almost promise you that not a single one will quite turn out to be what you thought they were by the time you get to the end game. Now, I said you're going to have to use your detective skills in this game. Well, that is all you're going to have to use. A little bit of puzzle solving, a little bit of investigation. There is no combat. This is not an action game. You won't be fighting monsters or even really cultists. There's one section in the game where you get to pull out a gun, but it isn't really a combat stage. You'll just get to point and click. There's not really any fighting in it, so don't expect there to be. It's not quite like some of the Cthulhu board games and role-playing games. Now, when you're not actually running around looking for clues in a location, most of your time will be spent in dialogue with any of the characters in the game. Just choose the option you want and listen to the story. Sometimes you'll have more dialogue options available depending on actions you've taken. If you don't have them, well, it clearly isn't important to the story. The game will progress just fine, so don't worry too much about that. Sometimes one of your skills will enable you to take a different dialogue option. Again, it's not essential. And also, maybe your sanity level. Oh, didn't I mention that? It's Cthulhu. Of course you're going to go insane to some point in this. Although, for all my sanity drops throughout the game, I never really saw any downside to that. But sometimes, it will give you another option in dialogue. The story's good and the voice acting is pretty decent, so do pay attention and enjoy it. Now, I mentioned some of the skills there. This is the skill system in the game. There's a couple of skills, occult and medicine, that you can put points in at the start of the game. They can never be improved by leveling up points after that. You have to read books within the game to improve those. And the rest of the skills, investigation, strength, etc., you've got points that you can choose at the start of the game to try and tailor your character a little bit, and you get points throughout the game to boost those even further. But here's the thing. I never found any of those skills made a damn difference the entire time I played through. Yes, I was trying to tailor my character to more into investigation. He is a private investigator, after all. But I found it made no difference. I could not pick any of the locks in the game that I found, no matter how many points I dumped into this, unless they were designed to be picked at that point by the story. And the same with the fighting and the investigation and the other things. It kind of felt entirely pointless, and it didn't seem to matter where I spent my skill points. The game was just going to roll on forwards exactly the same no matter what. And one other key game mechanic are these investigation scenes. They're kind of almost like a flashback, but your detective is putting together what happened at this scene at that time from the clues littered around. You go over and you check the thing on the table, and it suddenly makes everything appear as if you were there, as if in your mind you can picture what's going on. I can kind of see how that works from a detective point of view, but the thing is, it's not presenting you, the player, with clues who then has to try and piece it together yourself. It's basically giving you something to click on, and then you click on the next one, and the next one, and the story tells you everything. It doesn't ever leave you at a point thinking, ooh, I wonder if it could have been the butler with the candlestick in the library, and have to try and piece it together from the clues you're given. It doesn't ever feel like that. It just feels like you're pressing the button to get the next line in the story. I don't know whether this is a nice feature and well done that presents the story well, or a missed opportunity where it could have been left to the player to try and interpret the clues as best they could to piece together their own story in their mind to try and come to an outcome. But again, this is, well, maybe more of an interactive story than a true game. So that's how the game works. What are the graphics like? Well, all the locations are actually pretty well done. They're very dark, they're very gloomy, and they're very atmospheric. It has a kind of creepy feeling about it. It fits in with the theme of the game very nicely, even if they don't look particularly flashy for the time this game was released. But while the general game and location graphics I think are absolutely fine, one thing that bugged me was a lot of the NPC character animations. They were just awful, to be quite honest. A lot of the lip syncing didn't match up, and a lot of the character animations felt quite janky and jerky. It just didn't look right. A lot of it felt, I don't know, a little robotic, a little bit cheaply done, or maybe just not quite finished. Disappointing, I think, on that. But the cutscenes all look nice, and the general locations of the game have a nice gloomy, dark sort of feel to them. So yeah, that side is okay. The game sounds, I thought, were actually better done than the graphics. A lot of the time, you get a really good sense of being on your own and isolated. And little noises you'll hear, especially if you've got good stereo headphones on, will make you think, oh, was that something over there? Was that a door moving, a creaking, a floorboard? Is there something there? Is something following me? It actually, well, it did feel quite spooky. It fit in quite well. And for a game that is supposed to scare you a little bit, this worked. Also, the voice acting, I thought, was pretty good. I liked that quite a bit. It was quite distinct. It was pretty well done. Certainly better than the character animations for that voice acting.
The police report describes a domestic accident, but Stephen Webster has several reasons to believe that this may not be the case.
Webster is as stubborn as an old mule, and I did tell him that we should let the dead rest in peace.
The Last Supper of the Hawkins. What does this tell me?
So overall, what are my thoughts on Call of Cthulhu? Well, it's a mixture of positives and negatives. First, the not so good things. The game feels extremely linear. For example, at every location, in every chapter of the game, you pretty much have to do everything, and quite often in a set order as well, to progress. You can't skip something, you can't take a different path and end up at the next point in the game. You can't really diverge. The game often gives you an illusion of having a choice in matters, in dialogue options, or in choices to make. But really, none of those choices seem to make any difference. There's only a couple of scenes in the game that I can think of where you make a choice and it leads to a different outcome, or a different adventure, or a different path for the rest of the game. Everything else, while it often feels like it's giving you a choice, it isn't really. You have to do it in this order to progress. This is kind of disappointing because it takes away some of the meaningfulness of the decisions your character makes, and it left you feeling, well, you know, it doesn't really matter what I choose because the outcome's going to be more or less the same anyway. Like I say, there are a couple of points in the game where that is not the case, but for the majority of the game, that's really how it works. It does leave you just running through every location and every dialogue that you get into, just going through the motions of pressing the buttons just to skip, well, not to skip through it, but just to get through it quickly, because by the end of it, you don't really feel like any of this is making much of a difference, so why worry? Just tick all the boxes and get to the next scene. Although, it does play out the story. The story is quite good, so it's worth listening to for that, but the player freedom, there really isn't any. Also, the skill system felt like a real disappointment. I talked about it earlier, but putting points into different things didn't seem to make any difference to the outcome of anything whatsoever. Basically, if I was going to succeed at a task in the game had already decided it was time for the character to succeed at that and needed to for the story to progress. And it didn't seem to matter what my skills in that really were. It was just, well, you know, this is part of the linear progression of the game, so therefore you will pass that strength test, you will pass that lockpick test or not. It felt like it was hard-coded, and now that might not be the case, and maybe it was just a situation on my playthrough, but certainly what it felt like, and it kind of felt like the time and effort I was putting into choosing my skills carefully was utterly pointless. Which brings me on to the endings of the game, and don't worry, I won't give away what the endings are. But when you do get to the endings of the game, and I've seen 4 different ones, which sounds like a lot, right? It sounds like you can play through the game again and get something completely different, a different gaming experience. No, it doesn't quite work like that, because I've seen 2 of the endings myself from my own playthrough, and they differ that when you get right to the end, to the very last scene, you have an A or B choice. So if you save the game just before that, you can return and see the choice you didn't make very quickly. It's not like a huge different divergence in your game path as you go through. And the other 2 endings that I personally have seen, and there may be more, were viewed on a friend's stream, and he did one action, I mean just one action differently to me, a couple of chapters earlier before the end, which then branched off to get his 2 different A or B endings. And I've got to say that out of those 4 endings, 2 of them probably weren't worth watching and didn't feel very satisfying, but they were something different. Now, the problem with all this leads back to the linear feeling of the game, of course, which means that it doesn't really have any replay value. For all I enjoyed the story as we went through the entire thing, I don't feel like there's any point in me playing this again until years and years have passed and I've forgotten what the hell happened. Because I feel like when I play through it, it's going to be an almost identical experience from playing it the first time. i.e. I'm going to get to these 2 points that I know of in the game where I can make an A or B choice. In my case, I just messed something up and something else happened. But then apart from those, I feel like everything else I've seen in the game will be identical because it has to be like that because the story is that linear. You need to go through that to progress and get any further. So to me, the game doesn't have any replay value at all. But that's the bad stuff. The good stuff was that this did feel very Cthulhu-esque. I mean, very much so. With the occult, the monsters, or were they monsters? Is it all in your mind? Is this reality, or are you just going insane like your characters do in all Cthulhu adventures? The game does make you wonder, and at least one of the endings, if you see it, will make you wonder as well. It's quite cleverly done, and it does feel very much like the Cthulhu stories and board games and card games and role-playing adventures and any other Cthulhu mythos experience I have ever had. The game has tried to do that. The developers have pulled that off completely, I feel. And for Call of Cthulhu fans, well, you guys are probably going to love this for the 8 to 10 to 12 hours or so that the game takes you to get through. The story was pretty good, if there are a few what the hell moments through it that just make you wonder. There's not too many jump scares. It's not one of those that has you cacking your pants every 30 seconds in fear as some new horrible gribbly jumps out of the screen at you. It's not like that. There are a couple of moments, but they're quite nicely done. One thing the developers could have done better that I would have loved to have seen is more puzzle solving. There was some in the game. There's a couple of bits where I had to actually use my brain to figure out a couple of puzzles, and I love that in games. It's missing from a lot of games these days. They actually got a little bit in, but for a Cthulhu adventure game, I would have loved to have seen more, where you as the player actually had to use the grey matter to get past and unlock a certain situation. That was quite well done what they did, but I would have loved to see more, rather than it feeling just like a pressing A simulator, which I've heard other people describe this as, where you just go to each scenario, you click on the clue, you click on the person, you click on the dialogue, and you just go through it because it all has to be done in that sequence, in that order, to progress to the next bit. You're not really solving anything, you're not really working anything out, you're just clicking through. Which leads me back to the question, is this really a game or is it just an interactive story? And I do feel that it is almost the latter. Were it not for those few puzzle solving moments, then it really would just be an interactive story where you're going through and pressing the buttons to make the story come up on screen. You're not having to do a lot of work yourself to figure this out. It's just about being in the right location and pressing A, or whatever the key is on your keyboard or controller, at the right time to get the next thing up. So, in summing up, I would say that if you're not a Call of Cthulhu fan, then you probably want to wait for this to go on sale, because you'll get 8 to 12 hours out of it, roughly at a guess, and then you'll probably find it has no replay value. If you're a massive fan of Call of Cthulhu and love all the adventures and stories, you might want to get it sooner. But be warned, it is short, and there's no replay value, and, well, it is just really more of an interactive story. But it does that quite well, I will say that for it. So don't forget, folks, if you've no interest in buying and playing the game yourself, then you can check out my entire playthrough, spoilers, story and everything, down below in the link there. Go and check it out. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Hope you found the review useful. Do let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you again on the next one.